We're joined by Brian Smith to tell us, hey, why it's a little bit too soon to be hitting that panic button on Oklahoma's recruiting class. We'll talk about that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, and when you enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler. That's this one right here. Is golden, baby. Get that Bird Dogs tumbler. I'm joined today by Brian Smith. You can follow him on Twitter at FB Scout, Football Scout, FB Scout _Florida, covering all things recruiting for us here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Brian, how you doing, my friend?
Doing well, sir. How about yourself?
Doing great. Glad to have you on because it's been a little bit since we've had you on and some things have changed. And, you know, if the YouTube comments on some of our recent episodes are any indication, Oklahoma fans are kind of hitting the panic button a little bit. I'm not going to say the whole fan base, but there's a few out there that are a bit concerned as the news came in yesterday of the crystal balls and predictions, you know, having Bryant Wesco trending towards Clemson, the news of Zadavian Sims going to Oregon, and yeah, just kind of this feeling that, okay, nothing's hitting for Oklahoma yet. Why and why not? And where does Oklahoma stand? So maybe you can kind of give us a bit of a reality check, so to speak, on where Oklahoma's at in recruiting and why it's not a bad thing.
A couple of things. Number one, Oklahoma is a tradition-rich program. It's going to be okay in general. Let's start with that. It's not like Oklahoma gets a commitment every week. That's first. Second, you have a guy in charge who actually gets it. Venables is one of a handful of coaches that I trust in college football, and I am definitely a glass half empty guy. He is really, really good. They'll be fine long term. But it was only the first weekend of visits. That's it. I mean, you're going to have kids trending all over the place because they visited somewhere else last weekend. Does it really matter? No, not really. They're going to get these kids on campus either this summer or in the fall or both. I have trust in Venables in that as well. He's always been a good recruiter. He helped Clemson have numerous top classes. And a guy like Sammy Brown, for instance, that committed to Clemson, he's from frickin' Georgia. Clemson gets half their class or more from Georgia. It's just a closer deal. It's nothing Oklahoma can do about that. Now, Wesco is an interesting situation because they need more receivers. He's taken a visit. He's been to Clemson. Let's see what happens after he visits and all these other guys visit Norman. Their big weekends are the 9th and the 16th. They've even got kids coming in after that. Settle down on the panic button. Let's see how the entire month rolls out, especially with 4- and 5-star kids who are not going to make many decisions this summer that stick, meaning if they commit, they're still going to take visits, so I don't put a lot of stock in it. Oklahoma will be just fine. Give it a little time.
Yeah, and I'm a glass half full kind of a guy, and so it's really easy for me to see the positive things that are happening and look back to just last year and what they did in June a year ago. June, July, August was a big season of recruiting for the Sooners. Got a lot of commitments in those months. So yeah, I'm not quite hitting the panic button myself yet. I do think like these 2 weekends coming up are going to be absolutely huge for what they're wanting to do in 2024. Let's look at 2025 real quick because the trending name most recently for the Sooners is a 4-star wide receiver. Adrian Wilson was in Norman last week, also spent a little bit of time in Austin over the weekend as well. But all the predictions are coming in for this kid, and it is looking like Oklahoma is the trending favorite right now. Still really, really early in this recruitment, but they got to like where they stand.
I would rather be the favorite than not.
Right.
That's the first thing. Oklahoma has made a living off the Dallas Metroplex for the history of its program. It's not going to change. The kids there like Oklahoma, if not more than Texas, as much as a general rule. And I think, 3 or 4 different people have crystal balled him. I don't know the kid or whatever, but if that's the case, he's told somebody Oklahoma leads. That's kind of my experience in this. It's not random. So he's a really good player, and he's going to have 50 offers. He's one of those guys. Oklahoma, as we saw last year offensively, had moments where they struggled. They're going to be able to sell playing time to a kid like this too. And if Oklahoma wants to get back to that point where they can go back to the playoffs, this is the kid they get. I mean, look at all the guys Oklahoma put in the NFL at receiver in the last 25 years. How many of them are from Dallas, or somewhere around it? This isn't a hard sell. I like Venables in Oklahoma here for a lot of these kids. And, man, he's a good player. I've seen his film. He can really run. So Oklahoma fans should be very excited about that.
Yeah, skill position players are never going to be for a lack. You're always going to have the ability to bring skill position players into Oklahoma. Since Bob Stoops kind of brought the air raid with him and revolutionized offense and changed the game a little bit, people want to come play and be in a high flying offense. And, this is just a sign that that's going to continue to go. Even as a guy like Jeff Lebby, has his name being floated as a potential, head coaching candidate in the future. Wide receivers, quarterbacks, running backs, offensive linemen, they still want to be a part of it. So let's flip that. I just wanted to get that out of the way before we really dive into 2024, because we might not see a lot of commitments anytime soon, as you mentioned before. But the thing that is going to be the biggest storyline following this recruiting class until signing day in February is what Oklahoma does along the defensive line, because that's the area where most people feel like this is the unit that's not quite ready for the move to the SEC. And if you get to the SEC and you don't have the dudes in the trenches, you're going to struggle. So where do they stand? We can talk David Stone, Williams Nwaneri, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. We can go in a lot of different directions on this, but where do they stand on their defensive line?
Stone is the kid I know out of the group. I've interviewed him more times than I can count. I think Oklahoma is the leader in the clubhouse. But just the last time I spoke to David was a few weeks back down at IMG. I lived fairly close, and I was over there. And I'd mentioned to him that when I'd seen him in March, I was like, hey, there was a whole bunch of us around interviewing him because he's a really big name. And I said, you remember you said you would like to have your decision done, if at all possible, by the end of the summer. I said, is that still the plan? And he kind of looks up and he's like, uh-oh. And he just admitted he didn't know what he wanted to do. And part of it was getting the visits lined up. He said he was having a lot of problems because everybody wanted it on the same weekends. Oklahoma was kind of the oddball. They just wanted him on the 16th, and they were the only one, so that worked out easily. But he was struggling with even getting the visits lined up. So his recruitment is down the line. It'll be a signing day deal, in my opinion. I know Oklahoma fans don't want to hear that, but I don't care if he commits or not somewhere. It's going to be a signing day deal because he just loves the recruiting process. Nwaneri is the kid that I'm most interested in, though. Oklahoma needs edge rushers, something fierce. I watched them a couple of times last year, and their defense is nowhere in the stratosphere ready for the SEC. It wouldn't be in – I don't think they would be in the top 10 D-line in the SEC. I don't. I know that Oklahoma fans don't want to hear that either, but they're not close. They got to get some guys like that. His first visit was Georgia. That tells you something. Georgia, Oregon, Missouri, he's home state. Oklahoma, he's got a really wild list, but he's that long edge guy, 6'5", 250, can come in and play. They're right there for him. And this is the kind of kid that when you looked at Clemson, when a certain defense coordinator that's now in Norman would steal. Clemson wouldn't be the favorite for a kid. They'd visit and they'd love Venables. They'd love his scheme. They got to steal a couple of these kids, and they're right there for him, but he's really hard to project. If you're going to beat Alabama or Georgia or Clemson or Notre Dame or Ohio State, whoever in the playoffs, you got to get these guys. So they need at least two big-time guys. Stone needs to be one of them, obviously. What did he grow up, 30 minutes from Norman, something like that? I mean, it's Del City or whatever. They got to get him, and they got to get one more. Nwaneri would be my pick because they just need that edge rusher, and I think they have a great shot. So he's my sneaky pick for them. I don't think that many people are going to pick Oklahoma out of the national media because it's easy to pick Georgia for everybody, but I think they've got a great shot at him.
We'll talk about a few more names here in just a second, but first I want to tell you about our friends over at Bird Dogs. Great clothing line. If you haven't checked them out, highly recommend them. I've got these shorts and I wore them, throughout the humidity in the spring and the summer. And it's summer now in Oklahoma. Like, it's hot. We had a few cool weeks, at the end of May where it was kind of nice and was okay. It's just hot now. Get your Bird Dogs. They're comfortable. They're cool. They keep you cool. They keep you clean, keep you fresh, and they look good too. Fit great and look great. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Get that Bird Dogs tumbler as well right here. If you haven't seen it, it's right here for you. Got a great Bird Dogs logo. Keeps everything cool. I put ice water in it. at nighttime, came back the next day, there was still ice in it. So that's how good it is. Get the clothes, get the tumbler, birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Again, birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Brian Smith here with us here on Locked On Sooners at FBScout_Florida. Check out his work across the network. You can also find him writing for SI.com/Miami, covering the Miami Hurricanes as well. So Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, that was a name that was really buzzy towards Oklahoma at one point in time. And kind of now you mentioned Georgia, like being the favorite, almost you could pick them for everybody, but it does seem like maybe Joseph Jonah-Ajonye might be kind of trending a little bit towards the Bulldogs. I don't know what you're hearing on that front, but it just seems like there's a little bit of whisper right now as far as things go in Oklahoma circles.
Two things with that. Number one, you're right. Everybody picks Georgia because it's so convenient. Look, I live in Florida, and some of my buddies in the recruiting industry and a lot of guys that are analysts live somewhere close to Atlanta because it's so centralized to where we go to all these camps and combines. Everybody picks Georgia because it's just easy. Their staff does a better job than anybody. Nobody wants to hear that either, at making relationships work. So, okay, and they won 2 national titles. So if a kid's pretty open, let's just pick Georgia. I grow tired of it, and I try to stay away from doing that. I try to go against the trend. But until he visits and has an in-home with the Stoops family and all the different traditions they've had with recruiting and getting D linemen to the NFL and all that, I think Oklahoma will have a shot long-term. Is Georgia maybe lead right now? Do I care? No. Again, these elite kids are not going to make summer decisions, even if they commit. They're going to take more visits. They're still going to take phone calls. So I wouldn't panic about him either. And the other thing they've got going for them is the thing we just talked about a minute ago. Where are you going to play earlier? Oklahoma or Georgia, if you're a defensive lineman? If they can't sell that to him, then they're not going to win the battle. If he's a kid that just wants to go through the depth chart, then more power to him. Go to Georgia because you got a mile to get through that trench. But Georgia is just the easy pick for everybody. Anybody you see pick Georgia for a kid, unless it's like a kid from Athens or something, it's probably because of all the rumors kind of go to their way every day.
Yeah, and I think it's more just that right now, as opposed to guys out there making predictions. But they're just kind of some whispers a little bit under the surface, which, I mean, that's probably going to happen all the time.
Yeah, believe me, I live in Florida, where Georgia can get you punched around here. So
that's right. That's right. Under the radar prospects that Oklahoma needs to kind of be in, or Oklahoma fans need to be aware of. You know, we know about David Stone. That's the big fish in the recruiting cycle. If they don't land him, it's going to be a disappointment. But who are some guys that are kind of flying under the radar right now that Oklahoma's starting to really kind of get a handle on, or really Oklahoma fans should be paying attention to?
This is a personal deal here. The first one I'm going to mention is a kid that I know because he's playing in Florida. He's not even from this country. He's visited Oklahoma unofficially. Jason Zandamela. He's at Clearwater Academy International. You will not find a better kid. And he's an offensive lineman that is a pure athlete. He could probably play D-line if he wanted to. He just likes playing center. So he's Oklahoma, Southern Cal, Florida State, Miami. He's got all the big names. If they can get him, they can get a 3-year starter. He's that good. That's a kid people need to know about. Again, he's not even from the United States originally. And he came over and he's playing at Clearwater Academy International here in Florida. So that's one. The other one, and it's not because he's under the radar, he's really good, but I don't hear enough about him. Maybe it's because he's a West Coast kid, is Marcellus Williams. The other spot that Oklahoma really needs to hit is corner. That's not a newsflash to Oklahoma fans. DB has been a prime concern for quite a while. But they're battling both the LA schools. Back in the 80s, even the 70s, they used to get kids out of LA, San Diego, San Francisco, and they'd bring them in. They played all kinds of positions, the option quarterback, whatever. This is the kind of guy who can come in and play early. They need some more of that, and any DB they can get, because, again, I trust Venables. If he likes a corner, I like that corner. So, and that's how Oklahoma fans should look at it, too. I'm just using Marcellus as an example. He plays at Bosco, which you could make an argument is one of the top 5 high school programs in the country. But beyond that, probably a half dozen or so kids that will visit before the end of the month that are 3-star guys. When Venables wants them, it makes me question if they're really 3-star players. Because, Clemson made a living off of that and still got to the playoffs. So I trust his judgment with evaluation as much as anybody. So just any of the kids that you see on Oklahoma's visit list, it's a 3-star. Be careful, because it's probably not really a kid. That's a 3-star player.
Yeah, that's something we were actually talking about on the show, last night, is that, the recruiting evaluations, they matter. The stars matter. At the same time, you got to trust your coaches to evaluate kids at times too. And a lot of times the star rating can just be an under evaluation aspect. Not enough people have seen them from time to time, or just a level of competition can be a thing for some of these 3-star guys. But if Brent Venables, Todd Bates, Miguel Chavis, Bill Beatonbow, if they're seeing 3-star guys and they're offering them, there's something to that kid that they believe can play at the Power 5 level and play at a high level.
Yeah, like Michael Boganowski is from a small town in Kansas. What would he be ranked if he lived where I do in Central Florida? Nobody scouts Kansas. They just don't. So he's not going to get the same evaluation. It's just true. There's no way to do a fair, and I'm a part of these rankings. I talk to guys all the time. I helped somebody at another network yesterday rank a kid because I'd seen him live, and he asked me to do the rating for him. This is just the way how it works, because sometimes you can't see everybody. Oklahoma is going to get kids out of like Iowa, Colorado, Kansas, Arkansas that we don't see. I'll take Brent's word for it, and I'll be good with that.
Yeah, when you have 30 plus years of defense evaluations, now that doesn't mean that coaches don't miss on prospects. They do, sure, just like they do in the NFL. Everybody has misses, but you trust your evaluation method and you trust your evaluations, and then you go from there. Like you said, Brent Venables made a living off that at Clemson. He did that before here. When he was in Norman, the Oklahoma Sooners defense wasn't just littered with, future NFL players. They had some. I mean, they had the Gerald McCoys and the Tommy Harrises and, the Teddy Lamans, but then they had also, kind of under the radar guys that not everybody was after. So you got to have both, right? You got to have a mix of your elite talent plus the guys that do something really, really, really well that fit your scheme really, really, really well. And I think that matters. Another name I want to talk to you about, since he's from Florida, it's Eddy Pierre-Louis out of Tampa Catholic. Oh, yeah. Oklahoma has really made sure to kind of start trying to open up that pipeline at Tampa Catholic, got Lewis Carter in the 2023 cycle. So tell me about Eddy Pierre-Louis. What does he bring to the table? Where does Oklahoma stand with him?
Until recently, I lived about 2 minutes from that high school, so I know Eddie really well. To put it in perspective, the first time I met him, he was still a freshman in high school. It was the spring of his freshman year, and I knew his coach real well. And they were at a spring game that I was at, and they were just watching another team. And he said, "Yeah, this kid's got 10 offers already." And I said, "Is he going to be a senior?" And he said, "Brian, right now he's a freshman in high school." And keep in mind, Eddie was already 310. So I mean, he was a kid everybody knew about early. His brother played at Florida, etc. Eddie has taken a leap, not like physically, he was a man when he was 14, like a huge man, just rare as it gets. But he's changed his body. He's gotten a trainer. He's played all 5 spots on the offensive line. He has an offer from every school in the country. And to put into perspective just how talented he is, Georgia wants him not only as an offensive lineman, they want him as a nose guard. He has the option to play either side. If you can play nose at Georgia, you're a rare specimen. So he's a great kid too. He's a lot of fun. Oklahoma is one of the teams that he told me that he's going to visit. And that was a few weeks back. The day that I was there, LSU was scouting him. Georgia was scouting him. Texas A&M was scouting him. I mean, he's that guy. So I think he's the best offensive lineman in Florida. Oklahoma's in the mix, but he admitted openly that he's going to make a later decision. He's not going to rush it because he only wants to make one decision. And I respect that. So probably signing day for Big Eddie. And a power player, his best spot's probably guard, but he's even snapped some. I mean, if he can learn to be a center, he could be a 10-year NFL guy. So his strength is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. A guy that's been on the radar for people for a long time now, and it's now all coming to a head for him. And sticking with Florida, I think it's really what's interesting right now about Oklahoma is the running back position. They've kind of been in the mix for a lot of guys at this point. Caden Durham, Stacey, Gage, Tovani, Mizell, and Gage and Mizell is where I kind of want to land because they are from Florida. What are you hearing about those guys? Tovani Mizell was the Georgia commit, and he decommitted from Georgia, and almost immediately predictions were coming in for the Oklahoma Sooners, but we haven't seen any movement on that just yet. What's going on with Oklahoma's running back position, in particular, those running backs from Florida?
I know Stacey really well, and he told me Oklahoma, Miami, UCF, and Florida were the likely visits. That was this spring. That was a few weeks back when I saw him at St. Thomas Aquinas. I don't have any reason to doubt that. He always calls Oklahoma home. A lot of people may not know that, but his family's from Oklahoma. I think he might even been born. I'm not sure, but he has serious love for the Sooners. They're the wild card in this because his other 3 visits that he told me are all in-state schools. He visited UCF this past weekend. He really liked it, but I have no idea if a school like that she's getting ready to join the Big 12 really is going to get him. Miami's kind of a wild card. They're focused on a couple other kids, and they've got one committed already. And UF's running back room is pretty, I mean, that's the one spot Napier's done a pretty good job. They've really done a nice job. So Oklahoma's is in as good a spot as it can be, and they're going against 3 in-state schools, which doesn't make any sense. It's usually a bad sign, but I think they've got a really good shot with him. Mizell, I asked somebody the other day about that because I was down by his high school, and they're like, I have no idea where he's going. And it's somebody that would know because they know him personally. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll just let the visits play out. But like you, I saw the predictions. So you got me. I'm rarely stumped on a Florida kid, but his recruitment's been very odd.
Yeah, you'd think that with the decommitment, you'd feel like there'd be a commitment pretty quick after that. Something must have changed to want to decommit from Georgia, but here we are, kind of in waiting game a little bit, and that's okay. I mean, you got to play out the process and enjoy the process. If I were a high school kid being recruited by 30 Power 5 programs, I'd want to enjoy the process too. I'm not going to lie. I got recruited by nobody out of high school for baseball or anything like that. So enjoy all your visits, take them all, enjoy them. Last kid I want to talk to you about, because he's one of my favorite prospects in the 2023 or 2024 cycle, and that's Jaden Jackson. I know that he might not be the buzziest name for Oklahoma, but I just love that dude's tape and his game. And man, if they could end up with him, that would be. I always end up with these 3-star kids, 4-star kids that I end up falling in love with. Ashton Sanders at California was one of my favorites in the 2023 cycle, but for Jaden, it's Jaden Jackson in this cycle.
He's one of my favorite guys to talk to. He is the definition of humble when he doesn't have to be. His offer list is insane. Until recently, he hasn't gotten a lot of respect, which makes no sense because he's at IMG. That's the number one place for all of us scouts to go. We all know who's going to be there, what time they're going to show up, what car they're driving. We're all going to IMG when they have different open workouts. It's just, you have to go. They got 20 kids in every class that are Power 5. So Jaden is as technically sound as any defensive lineman in the country. He takes to his craft like an NFL player. Very mature, very responsible. He started to change his body, and he's grown wider at the chest and smaller at the waist, the whole 9 yards. He even went to the Polynesian Bowl workout, which he's a lock to go to anyway. They were just having him just to make sure they could fill out the roster. He went out there because it was held at IMG and did the workouts with a bunch of kids that had no business being on the field with him because he's that guy. So I get your point about the whole love his tape, love his attitude. Everything he does is based on how a pro player would do it. So, yeah, I love him too. Ohio State is like a trendy pick with him. Florida and Miami are up there. But he told me a few weeks ago, and this was right before he dropped down to like his top 5 or 6. He was just overwhelmed. He open-endedly was overwhelmed because he'd gotten so many offers. And like to your point, if you got 30 Power 5 offers, man, that's hard because all these schools, you can only pick one. So, and he doesn't like to tell people no because he's a nice kid. Oklahoma has as good a shot as anybody because he's probably going to take a visit and he's probably going to like Venables. So let's kind of wait and see. Man, what a fun kid to watch. His film is a lot of fun. It is a blast.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of those things that, sometimes when a guy like David Stone is a very high profile prospect, you kind of fly under the radar a little bit. And that's why when I eventually saw him, I was like, how come we're not talking enough about this kid? Like, where's all the think pieces on what he's going to do with his recruitment? Like, this is a kid that Oklahoma needs to be going after just as hard as they are David Stone. And I know David Stone is a big fan of his too, because when the offer came in, he's like, hey, let's go play together kind of a thing. Whether that happens or not, that remains to be seen. But yeah, man, it's cool to see guys that might be flying under the radar, or at least were about 6 months ago, start to pick up more buzz because he's a good player. And again, it comes back to the evaluate, how many people are talking about him, evaluating things like that. But he looks more than just a 3-star player, but we'll see where it all lands. But he's one of those guys that every defensive coordinator would love to have on the interior of his defensive line, because not only can he play the run, but he can push people into the backfield and disrupt the passing game as well and get back there just as well. So,
I love his pass rush game more than anything because he uses his hands well and he's got multiple moves. Yeah. Again, he's taken to his craft. When you can be an interior guy and rush the passer, there is no more valuable asset to a defensive coach. No play works when there's an A-gap penetration. It is bad news bears, period.
That's right.
And that's what he does. And playing next to Stone, I feel sorry for teams playing IMG. Most of the time, Stone will get the double team. Good luck with Jayden on a single. Not many guys are going to handle him. So he'll probably lead the team in tackles for loss this year, even with Stone playing next to him.
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much, Brian, for taking your time and being a part of the show. If y'all have questions for Brian, make sure you drop them in the comments section. We'll hit him up next time that we have him on here on Locked On Sooners. Follow Brian on Twitter at FBSScout_Florida. Also check out his work at si.com/college/Miami as well. And you can find him covering recruiting all over the Locked On Podcast Network. But until next time, he's Brian Smith. I'm John Williams. We'll talk to you then. Boomer Sooner.